For most of my life, I believed existence was something you had to earn. Not consciously. Not in words. It was a quiet assumption that shaped everything I did. The belief that you don't simply get to live, you have to justify it. Prove your worth. Contribute enough. Be useful enough. Be good enough. I didn't question that belief because it felt responsible. I worked hard. I didn't complain. I tried not to take up too much space. I listened more than I spoke. I avoided being a burden. I told myself that if I did everything right, one day I would finally feel entitled to my own life. That day never came. Instead, life passed while I was busy qualifying for it. I don't remember when this way of thinking began. There was no single trauma, no dramatic moment where someone told me I didn't matter. It was subtler than that. A collection of small lessons absorbed over time. Praise when I was useful. Silence when I wasn't. Approval tied to performance. Affection that arrived conditionally. So I adapted. I became competent. Reliable. Low maintenance. I learned how to make myself valuable without being visible. I mistook discipline for identity and sacrifice for meaning. People respected me. Inside, I felt strangely hollow. Not empty, unfinished. I moved through my days with the sense that I was always preparing for something. A future version of myself who would finally relax, finally feel allowed to want things, finally stop measuring their worth in output. I told myself, not yet. Not yet tired enough. Not yet successful enough. Not yet deserving enough. That internal voice was never cruel. That's what made it dangerous. It sounded reasonable. Mature. Like a voice that knew how the world worked. And so I listened. I postponed joy without realizing it. I treated rest like a reward, not a necessity. I treated desire like a distraction. Whenever I felt dissatisfied, I assumed the problem was me, that I hadn't tried hard enough yet. Years went by like that. I did what was expected. Built what made sense. Avoided obvious mistakes. On paper, my life looked stable. Respectable. Sensible. People trusted me because I never asked for much. What they didn't see was how often I felt like a guest in my own existence. I was always slightly outside myself, observing, managing, correcting. I lived as if my real life would begin once I reached some invisible threshold, a level of usefulness that would finally grant me permission to stop striving. But permission never arrived. The first crack appeared in an ordinary moment. I had just completed something significant, something that should have made me feel proud. People congratulated me. They told me I had earned it. That I deserved to feel satisfied. And I nodded. I smiled. I thanked them. Then I went home and sat alone, feeling nothing. No relief. No joy. No sense of arrival. Just the familiar pressure to keep going. That was the moment I realized something was deeply wrong. If achievement didn't bring peace, what was I chasing? I started paying attention to my inner dialogue. Really listening to it for the first time. And what I heard unsettled me. I was constantly justifying my existence. I deserve rest because I worked hard. I deserve happiness because I've been patient. I deserve to want things because I've sacrificed. Everything was conditional. There was no version of me who was allowed to exist without explanation. That realization hit harder than any failure ever had. Because it meant I wasn't living, I was auditioning. Constantly proving that I had the right to be here, to take up space, to want more than survival. I asked myself a question I had avoided for years: who would I be if I stopped trying to earn my life? The silence that followed was terrifying. I didn't know the answer. Not because it didn't exist, but because I had never allowed myself to ask. And once that question was out in the open, everything I had built began to feel unstable. Like a structure designed to support effort, not identity. I realized I had confused worth with usefulness for so long that I no longer knew how to separate the two. That night, I understood something painful and liberating at the same time. I wasn't exhausted because life was hard. I was exhausted because I had never let myself simply live. Once that thought settled in my mind, it refused to stay theoretical. I tried to continue as before. I told myself that insight didn't require action, that understanding something didn't mean I had to dismantle my entire life. But the understanding had already changed the way everything felt. Effort stopped feeling noble. Discipline stopped feeling virtuous. Endurance stopped feeling meaningful. It just felt endless. I began to notice how often my days were driven by obligation rather than intention. How my schedule was shaped by what needed to be done, not by what I wanted to experience. I wasn't overwhelmed, I was emptied out by repetition without reward. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask a dangerous question: what if I stopped proving anything? The idea terrified me. Without effort, who was I? Without contribution, what was my value? Without constant justification, what would keep me from disappearing? Those questions revealed how fragile my sense of self really was. It had been built on motion, not presence. On performance, not identity. I tested the idea in small ways. I rested without explaining. I declined things without replacing them with something useful. I allowed myself to feel tired without immediately correcting it. The guilt was immediate and intense. It felt like I was breaking an unspoken rule, one I had internalized so deeply that violating it triggered shame. I felt lazy, selfish, undeserving. As if the world might notice my stillness and withdraw its approval. Nothing happened. The world kept moving. People kept living. No punishment arrived. That silence was unsettling, because it meant the pressure had never come from outside. It had always lived inside me. I began to see how much of my life had been shaped by an internal judge that never rested. A voice that evaluated every moment, every emotion, every desire, and asked whether it was justified. That voice had kept me safe. It had also kept me small. I realized how rarely I had acted from desire alone. Desire felt irresponsible, immature, indulgent. I had learned to filter it until it resembled practicality, or to dismiss it entirely. When I finally listened to it, really listened, it sounded weak, uncertain, almost foreign. Not because it was insignificant. Because it had been ignored for so long. I tried to imagine a life not centered on earning. A life where rest wasn't a reward. Where joy didn't need permission. Where existence wasn't something I had to defend. The image felt abstract, almost absurd. I didn't know how to inhabit it. It felt like being asked to speak a language I had never been taught. That's when the fear deepened. If I stopped striving, I might discover that I didn't know who I was without the struggle. That there was no solid core beneath the effort, only exhaustion and unanswered questions. But another fear emerged alongside it. What if there was something there, and I had been avoiding it all along? That possibility unsettled me more than emptiness ever had. I noticed how often I filled my time to avoid stillness. How silence made me restless. How unstructured time felt threatening, as if it might expose something unfinished. One evening, I sat alone and did nothing. No productivity. No improvement. No justification. Just presence. The discomfort was intense at first. My thoughts raced, searching for something to fix, something to plan, something to prove. When they found nothing, they turned inward. And there it was. Grief. Not dramatic grief. Quiet, steady, undeniable grief for a life spent postponing itself. For joy delayed until it no longer felt natural. For rest treated like a luxury instead of a human need. I let that grief exist without correcting it. That was new. I realized then that my constant striving hadn't been about ambition. It had been about control. If I kept moving, improving, earning, I could avoid confronting the question of whether I was enough as I was. Motion had protected me from vulnerability. Letting go meant stepping into uncertainty without armor. The crisis wasn't about changing careers or relationships or locations. It was about identity. About whether I could allow myself to exist without explanation. The thought scared me deeply. Because if I stopped trying to deserve my life, I would have to accept it as something already given. And accepting something freely is far more frightening than earning it. I stood at the edge of that realization, knowing that once I crossed it, I couldn't return to the old logic without feeling dishonest. Either I would continue living as if existence were conditional, or I would risk discovering who I was when I stopped trying to qualify for it. The shift didn't feel like relief. It felt like standing without armor for the first time. I didn't wake up suddenly free. I woke up aware. Aware that the rules I had lived by were never laws, they were habits. Learned patterns. Quiet contracts I had signed with fear and called responsibility. So I stopped negotiating my existence. Not completely. Not perfectly. But deliberately. I stopped asking whether I deserved rest. I stopped measuring my value by output. I stopped apologizing for taking up space in my own life. At first, nothing dramatic happened. And that was unsettling. I had expected consequences, disapproval, loss, some form of punishment for stepping out of line. Instead, life continued. That was the moment I understood how much of my suffering had been self-inflicted. The world hadn't demanded proof of my worth. I had. Letting go of that belief didn't make everything easy. In fact, it made some things harder. Without constant striving, I could no longer hide behind effort. I had to face myself as I was, uncertain, unfinished, human. There were days when I felt exposed. When I missed the structure of earning, the familiar exhaustion that at least told me who I was supposed to be. Struggle had given my life shape. Without it, I had to create meaning more consciously. That responsibility felt heavy. But it was honest. I began allowing myself to exist without explanation. To enjoy moments without attaching them to progress. To rest without planning my next move. To want things without immediately justifying them. Guilt still visited quietly, out of habit. But it no longer ruled me. I learned that guilt fades when you stop feeding it with obedience. I didn't become passive. I didn't abandon effort entirely. I still worked, still cared, still contributed. The difference was subtle but profound. I no longer used effort as proof that I deserved to be here. I existed first. Everything else came second. That reordering changed how I moved through the world. I listened more to myself. I noticed what drained me and what gave something back. I stopped seeing exhaustion as virtue and started seeing it as information. Some parts of my old life fell away. Certain relationships felt awkward when I no longer played my role. Some expectations dissolved when I stopped meeting them automatically. That loss hurt. But keeping them would have required me to return to a version of myself I could no longer inhabit. What replaced them wasn't grand or triumphant. It was quieter. Presence. Attention. A growing sense that my life was no longer something I was trying to earn, but something I was finally inhabiting. I don't believe anymore that existence must be justified. I don't believe rest has to be deserved. I don't believe worth is conditional. Those beliefs didn't disappear overnight, they loosened slowly, through practice, through choice, through repeated refusal to treat myself as a project that needed constant improvement. If there is one thing I know now, it's this: life doesn't begin when you finally deserve it. It begins when you stop asking permission to be here. I spent years trying to earn my right to exist. And only when I stopped did I realize something simple, and devastatingly true: I had been alive the whole time. I just wasn't letting myself live. And now, even with uncertainty, even without guarantees, I am. And everything that comes with that, is worth the cost.